Daniel, you deceived us. You lied to us. What is all this? Does this seem funny to you? Play with our intelligence.
Please, Sharon, I'm sorry. I had my reason. Wasn't my intention to deceive anyone. Please, I need you to understand.
This is absolutely insane. What do you want me to understand here? You know this isn't fair at all.
Sharon, please.
How could you?
The words sounded sincere, but her heart remained untouched. That evening, Steve listened as Ruth described her day with Daniel. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Has he ever talked about marriage? Ruth hesitated. Not yet. Steve smiled. He will. And when he does, don't say yes immediately. Make him prove himself. Ruth frowned. What do you mean? Steve leaned closer. Tell him you need help. Maybe your business. Maybe your rent. If he really loves you, he'll do anything. Ruth remained silent. Deep down, she knew Steve wasn't talking about love. He was talking about money. A few days later, Ruth sat quietly in her shop, pretending to be upset. Daniel noticed immediately. What's wrong? She looked away. It's nothing. Daniel smiled gently. You don't have to hide your worries from me. After a long pause, Ruth sighed. My landlord says I have to pay the rent by the end of the week. I don't know what I'm going to do. Daniel didn't ask another question. He quietly reached into his bag. Inside was an envelope containing money. I was saving this, but I think you need it more than I do. Ruth stared at the envelope. For a brief moment, even she hadn't expected him to give so much. She accepted it with trembling hands. Thank you. Daniel smiled. Seeing you smile is enough for me. As he wheeled away, Sharon had witnessed everything from inside the shop. She lowered her head, because she knew exactly where that money would end up. The shop was quiet. Only the ticking of the wall clock broke the silence. Sharon looked at the envelope in Ruth's hands. Are you really going to take his money? Ruth answered without looking up. He offered. Sharon stepped closer. You lied to him. You don't owe your landlord anything. Ruth finally met her eyes. I never forced him. He chose to help me. Sharon's voice trembled. No, he chose because he believes you love him. A long silence followed. Then Ruth placed the envelope into her handbag. If believing that makes him happy, what's the harm? Sharon felt tears sting her eyes, because she knew the answer. The harm wasn't in the money. It was in the heart that Ruth was slowly breaking, without him even knowing it. And somewhere far away, fate was already preparing a day that none of them would ever forget. Rain poured steadily across the busy street. Daniel smiled as he waited patiently for Ruth to finish work. He wanted to surprise her with dinner, but someone else was watching too. From the shadows, Steve. His eyes followed Daniel carefully. He's becoming too attached, he muttered. When Ruth finally closed the shop, she walked straight toward Daniel. Steve watched as Daniel happily handed her an umbrella before covering her from the rain. Steve frowned. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about money. He was wondering whether Ruth was beginning to enjoy Daniel's company more than she admitted. That night, Steve's mood was different. You've been spending too much time with him. Ruth looked confused. That's the point. Steve shook his head. No, the point is to get what we need, not to start caring. Ruth laughed awkwardly. I don't care about him. Steve stared into her eyes. Good, because if he ever becomes more important than me, you'll lose both of us. His words hung heavily in the room. For the first time, Ruth felt trapped between the future she wanted and the lie she had created. The following morning, Sharon left the shop to buy breakfast. As she turned into a quiet side street, she stopped. Her heart skipped a beat. Ruth stood there, smiling, not at Daniel, at Steve. Then, without hesitation, she handed Steve the same envelope Daniel had sacrificed his savings to give her. Steve kissed her forehead. You've done well. Sharon's eyes filled with tears. Every fear she had carried had just become reality. Sharon managed to get Daniel's number for almost an hour. Sharon sat staring at her phone. Daniel's number was right there. One phone call, one conversation, could save him from heartbreak. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but then she remembered Ruth's words. Don't interfere. You'll ruin everything. Sharon closed her eyes. She wasn't afraid of losing Ruth's friendship. She was afraid that Daniel would think she was lying out of jealousy. Slowly, she lowered the phone and whispered, "I hope I'm not making the biggest mistake of my life." As the evening sun reflected across the river, Daniel smiled. "You know, I've never felt this happy before." Ruth looked at him. He continued softly, "Before I met you, I thought I'd spend my life alone. But now, I can actually imagine growing old with someone." Ruth forced another smile. She reached across the table and held his hand, but inside, her heart remained silent. Across the street, unknown to both of them, Sharon had seen everything, and the guilt was becoming unbearable. Another week passed. By now, having lunch together had become part of their routine. Daniel always arrived a little early, not because he was impatient, but because every minute spent with Ruth felt special. As they shared a simple meal, Ruth laughed at Daniel's stories. She complimented his kindness. She told him she felt safe whenever she was with him. Daniel's heart grew lighter with every conversation. To him, this wasn't just friendship anymore. It was the beginning of something he had prayed for all his life. But behind every warm smile, Ruth was just after the benefits she'd got with just rendering a little caring gestures. The next morning, Daniel stopped by Ruth's shop before she opened for business. He handed her a small gift bag. Ruth smiled brightly. "You didn't have to buy me anything." Daniel chuckled. "I know, but I saw it and thought of you." Inside the bag was a beautiful silk scarf in Ruth's favorite color. It wasn't expensive, but it had been chosen with care. Ruth wrapped it around her neck and admired herself in the mirror. "It looks lovely," she said. Daniel's face lit up. Sharon watched quietly. She noticed something Ruth didn't. Daniel wasn't trying to impress her with money. He was paying attention to the little things that made her happy. Later that evening, Ruth proudly showed Steve the scarf. He barely glanced at it. "That's nice." Then he asked, "So, has he given you anything useful?" Ruth frowned. "What do you mean?" Steve sighed impatiently. "Money." "Has he helped you financially again?" Ruth shook her head. "Not since the rent." Steve leaned back. "Then you're moving too slowly." "He trusts you now. It's time to ask for something bigger." Ruth looked uneasy. She wasn't sure she wanted to push Daniel that far, but she also didn't want to disappoint Steve. The streets were quiet as the two friends walked home. After several minutes of silence, Sharon finally spoke. "Can I ask you something?" Ruth nodded. "When Daniel looks at you, do you ever feel guilty?" Ruth sighed. "Not again, Sharon. I'm serious. He's beginning to build his future around you." Ruth stopped walking. "You think I don't know that?" Sharon looked at her carefully. "Then why keep lying?" Ruth folded her arms. "Because I have to make my life easier with all of this. I'm doing what I have to do." Sharon shook her head gently. "No, this is a helpless man who is disabled. He deserves better from life." Those words stayed with Ruth long after they had gone their separate ways, but she ignored it and never thought of it as a reason to feel guilty or stop just focusing on the benefits. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept returning to Ruth. He remembered every laugh they had shared, every walk through the park, every cup of coffee, every conversation that had made him believe love was finally finding him. For months he had watched her, he had prayed, he had searched her heart as best as he could. And now, his own heart had reached a decision. He wanted Ruth to become his wife. Daniel looked up toward the ceiling and whispered with a smile, "Father, Mother, I think I've found her." Little did he know, the woman he was ready to spend his life with that evening. Ruth couldn't hide her anxiety. Steve noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, then quietly replied, "What if Daniel proposes?" Steve's smile disappeared. "Why are you thinking of such? I can feel it." Steve stood up and began pacing around the room. "This changes everything." Ruth looked confused. "What do we do?" Steve stopped and looked directly at her. "Accept the proposal first, let's know what to do next." Ruth quickly agreed. Steve continued, "There may still be something to gain." Ruth stared at him. "Yeah, that's right." The next evening, as they closed the shop, Sharon asked Ruth, "What if Daniel proposes?" "What?" Ruth sighed. "I know what to do. Don't worry about that." Sharon slowly walked toward her. "This has gone too far." Ruth shrugged. "I'll handle it." Sharon's voice trembled. "No, you should tell him the truth." Ruth looked away. "I can't." Sharon shook her head. "Every day you wait, The truth becomes more painful, whatever. I'm still not ready to let go of the life I imagined with Steve. A week later, Daniel invited Ruth to the botanical gardens where they had shared so many happy memories. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of flowers. Daniel's hands trembled, not because he was afraid, but because this moment meant everything to him. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple but elegant engagement ring. He looked into Ruth's eyes. "Ruth, you've brought light into my life. You've shown me kindness when I thought the world had forgotten me. I don't have riches to offer. I don't have a perfect body, but I promise to love you, respect you, and stand beside you for the rest of my life." Then, with hopeful eyes, he asked, "Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stand still. Just as she thought, it happened without wasting any time. Ruth's heart raced. This was the moment she had feared. For several long seconds, she couldn't speak. Then she looked at Daniel's hopeful face. She remembered Steve's words, "Don't reject him yet." Slowly, she forced a smile. Tears filled her eyes, not because she was happy, but because she needed Daniel to believe she was. She whispered, "Yes." Daniel's face lit up with pure joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger. As he embraced the woman he believed would soon become his wife, Ruth quietly closed her eyes. She had just accepted a proposal from a man she never intended to marry, and that single word, yes, would become the biggest mistake of her life. For Daniel, life had never felt more beautiful. Every morning he woke up with gratitude in his heart. The woman he loved had accepted his proposal. He could already picture the future. A small home filled with laughter, quiet evenings together, children running through the garden. He didn't dream about luxury. He dreamed about love. As he looked at Ruth's smiling photograph, he whispered, "Thank you, God. You finally answered my prayer." Far away, someone else looked at the same engagement ring, not with love, but with fear. While Daniel carefully planned their future, Ruth was living two completely different lives. With Daniel, she was the loving fiancée. With Steve, she was still the woman promising him a better life. That evening, Steve looked at her with growing frustration. "So, when's the wedding?" Ruth answered quietly. "In about 6 weeks." Steve laughed sarcastically. "So the cripple really believes he's won." Ruth remained silent. Steve leaned forward. "Listen carefully. You're not marrying him. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly. "But I don't know how to stop this anymore." Steve smiled. "I do." The next morning, customers couldn't stop admiring Ruth's ring. "Oh, congratulations. When's the wedding? What a lucky bride." Ruth smiled and thanked them. Each congratulation felt like another lie she had to carry. After the customers left, Sharon gently held Ruth's hand. The ring sparkled under the shop lights. "You still have time." Ruth looked away. "Time for what?" "To tell him the truth." Ruth slowly pulled her hand back. "I can't." Sharon sighed. "You mean, you won't?" The silence between them said everything. One quiet afternoon, Daniel arrived carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers, but Ruth wasn't there. "She'll be back soon," Sharon said with a gentle smile. Daniel nodded. "No problem." As they waited, an awkward silence filled the room. Finally, Daniel smiled. "You've always been kind to me." Sharon lowered her eyes. "I just try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated." Daniel laughed softly. "The world needs more people like you." Those simple words pierced Sharon's heart. If only he knew how desperately she wanted to tell him the truth. That night, Steve made a decision. "We're changing the plan." Ruth looked confused. "What do you mean?" Steve leaned over the table. "Take everything he gives you for the wedding. The money, the gifts, everything." Ruth swallowed hard. And then, Steve looked her straight in the eyes. "Disappear. No wedding, no goodbye, nothing." Ruth nodded. "That's a nice plan." Steve shrugged. He stood and walked toward the window. Besides, what can a poor cripple do about it? Neither of them knew that the man they were mocking was a billionaire prince whose name alone could change their entire lives. The gentle sound of the river filled the silence. Daniel smiled as he looked toward the setting sun. "Can I tell you something?" Ruth nodded. Daniel took a slow breath. "I know I can't give you a luxurious life right now, but I promise you this. I'll never let you fight life's battles alone. If I have one loaf of bread, we'll share it. If I have one blanket, we'll both stay stay warm. I may not be the richest man in the world, but every beat of my heart belongs to you." Ruth looked away. She couldn't answer. Not because she was touched, but because every promise Daniel made her lies heavier. That night, Daniel opened a small metal box he had carefully hidden beneath his bed. Inside were months of savings. Every note had a purpose. Every coin represented sacrifice. He had skipped meals, walked instead of taking taxis whenever possible, bought only what he truly needed, not because he enjoyed struggling, but because every sacrifice brought him one step closer to marrying the woman he loved. Holding the money in his hands, Daniel whispered, "It isn't much, but it's everything I have." Far away, someone else was already deciding what to do with it. When the last customer left, Sharon locked the shop door. She turned to Ruth with tears already forming in her eyes. "Please, before this goes any further, tell Daniel the truth." Ruth pulled her hands away. "I can't." Sharon's voice trembled. "You can. You're choosing not to." Ruth closed her eyes. "You don't understand." Sharon answered softly, "Then help me understand." For the first time, Ruth's mask slipped. "I'm scared. If Steve leaves me, I'll have nobody." Sharon looked at her with sadness. "And what about Daniel? He'll lose the woman he believes is his future." A heavy silence filled the room. Neither woman spoke again. That same night, Steve's patience had run out. "The wedding money. When are you getting it?" Ruth answered quietly. "In a few days." Steve smiled. "Good. Take every penny. Then switch off your phone. Block him. Disappear." Ruth stared at him. "What if he comes looking for me?" Steve laughed. "He won't. What's he going to do? Run after you?" Ruth forced a weak smile, but inside, something didn't feel right anymore. Still, she convinced herself there was no turning back. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived carrying another surprise. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't money. It was a beautiful handmade journal. On the cover were the words, "Our journey begins." Daniel handed it to Ruth. "I thought, every couple deserves a place to write their happiest memories." Ruth slowly opened the first page. Daniel had already written something inside. "No matter where life takes us, thank you for choosing me." For a brief moment, Ruth's eyes became watery, not because she loved him, but because no one had ever loved her with such honesty before. Sharon watched quietly. She could see the conflict growing inside her friend. A few days later, Daniel invited Ruth to their favorite little cafe. After they ordered tea, he reached into his bag. Slowly, he placed a brown envelope on the table. Ruth looked at it in surprise. Daniel smiled. "I've been saving this for months. It's not much, but I want you to use it for your wedding dress, and anything else you think we'll need." Ruth's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. She already knew. This was the money Steve had been waiting for. Daniel gently covered her hand with his. "I trust you." 3 simple words. "I trust you." They echoed in Ruth's mind long after they left the cafe. She smiled back at him, but inside, she felt the crushing weight of a lie that was about to destroy far more than a wedding. The following morning, Ruth stood inside a small bridal shop. The sales assistant beamed with excitement. "Congratulations. Are you the bride?" Ruth forced a smile. "Yes." The word came easily, but it felt heavy. She walked past several beautiful gowns before choosing a simple dress. It wasn't the most expensive. It wasn't the grandest. It was just enough to convince everyone that a wedding was about to happen. As the assistant wrapped the dress, Ruth stared at it in silence. She wasn't imagining herself wearing it. She was already imagining someone else, someone who wasn't even aware of such. That evening, Daniel couldn't stop talking about the future. "I've already chosen the flowers. I found a little house we can rent. It's small, but it has a garden." He laughed softly. "I know it's silly, but I can already picture you planting flowers there." Ruth nodded. She smiled when she was expected to smile. She laughed when she was expected to laugh. But every beautiful dream Daniel described only reminded her that she had no intention of living it. For the first time, she struggled to meet his eyes. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived carrying a beautifully printed envelope. His eyes sparkled with excitement. "They're ready." Ruth opened it slowly. Inside were the wedding invitations. She read her own name, Daniel and Ruth. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't pretending anymore. The wedding had become real. Daniel smiled like an excited child. I've never been happier. Only a few more days, and you'll be my wife. Standing inside the shop, Sharon watched the scene unfold. A tear slipped down her cheek because she knew only one of those two smiles was real, and very soon, one of those hearts would be shattered forever. Daniel could hardly contain his excitement. He called his parents and informed them about the wedding. The invitations have been printed. The venue has been booked, just a little gathering for now. I've even chosen the music. I finally understand what people mean when they say love changes everything. King Leonard smiled proudly. When the wedding is over, after some time with her, I'll finally bring her home. The next morning, Ruth called Sharon to her apartment. Her voice sounded unusually calm. On the wardrobe hung the wedding dress. Sharon smiled faintly. I'm glad you changed your mind. Ruth slowly shook her head. I haven't. Sharon's smile disappeared. Ruth took a deep breath, then said something that left Sharon speechless. I need you to do something for me. Sharon frowned. What is it? Ruth looked directly at her. I want you to go to my wedding. Sharon blinked in confusion. What do you mean? Ruth continued. Just represent me. Tell Daniel I couldn't make it because of an emergency. After that, you can leave. Silence filled the room. Sharon couldn't believe what she had just heard. No, the answer came immediately. Sharon stepped backwards. I won't help you humiliate him. Ruth grabbed her hand. Please. I have no one else. Sharon pulled away. You should be asking for forgiveness, not for my help. Ruth's voice trembled. If you don't do this, Steve will leave me. Sharon stared at her in disbelief. So you'd rather destroy Daniel's life than lose a man who only loves your money? That's a lie. We love each other. Sharon walked slowly to the window. Her heart felt heavy. If she refused, Daniel would wait alone at the altar. If she agreed, she would become part of Ruth's deception. Neither choice felt right. She whispered, God, what am I supposed to do? Behind her, Ruth spoke through tears. I'm not asking you to marry him. Just go there. Tell him I had an emergency. Apologize for me, then leave. Sharon closed her eyes. She thought of Daniel, his gentle smile, his kind heart, the way he trusted people without suspicion. Finally, she turned around. I'll go, but only to tell him the truth. I'm not pretending to be your bride. Ruth immediately stood and hugged her. Thank you. Sharon didn't hug her back. Across town, the wedding venue was filled with quiet excitement. Fresh flowers decorated every corner. Simple white ribbons danced gently in the breeze. Daniel looked around with grateful eyes. It wasn't a grand wedding, but it was perfect. Everything had been prepared with love. Every flower, every chair, every detail. He smiled as he imagined seeing Ruth walk through the entrance. To him, this wasn't just a wedding. It was the beginning of the family he had always dreamed of. Half an hour passed, then another. Daniel glanced at his phone. He smiled to himself. She must be nervous. He pressed the call button. The phone rang. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. One more time. Switched off. His smile began to fade. A small knot formed in his stomach. Maybe she's on her way. He whispered the words more for himself than anyone else. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet fear had begun to grow. A taxi slowly pulled up outside the venue. The door opened. Sharon stepped out. She looked down at the white dress she never imagined wearing. Each step toward the entrance felt heavier than the last. She wasn't there to become a bride. She wasn't there to steal anyone's happiness. She had come with one purpose, to apologize for a betrayal she never committed. She took a deep breath, then quietly walked inside. The doors slowly opened. Every guest turned to look. Daniel lifted his head. For one brief moment, relief flooded his heart. Then, confusion. Something wasn't right. The woman walking toward him wasn't Ruth. It was Sharon. The room fell silent. Daniel looked at her with worried eyes. Sharon, where's Ruth? Sharon stopped a few steps away. Her lips trembled. She had rehearsed the words all morning, but now, looking into Daniel's hopeful eyes, every sentence disappeared. She realized that no apology could ever soften what she was about to say, and with one deep breath, the truth was finally ready to come out. Tears rolled down Sharon's cheeks. She had promised herself she would stay strong, but standing before Daniel, seeing the hope in his eyes, broke her completely. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Daniel frowned. Sharon, you're frightening me. What happened? She tried to speak. The words refused to come. She covered her face. I don't know how to say this. Daniel gripped the arms of his wheelchair tightly. His heart was pounding. Every second of silence felt like another piece of his world falling apart. Finally, I'm sorry. Ruth isn't coming. Daniel stared at her, as if he hadn't heard correctly. What do you mean? Sharon took a trembling breath. She sent me. Daniel blinked. Sent you? Sharon nodded through tears. She told me she could never marry a crippled man who wasn't rich. The words echoed through the hall. Daniel didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared ahead, as though his heart had forgotten how to beat. Daniel lowered his head. No tears came. Sometimes pain is so deep that tears cannot find their way out. He remembered every promise, every smile, every dream, every moment he believed someone had finally accepted him. It had all been a lie. His voice was barely above a whisper. So, I was never enough. Sharon quickly shook her head. No, please don't ever think that. You were always enough. She simply couldn't see your worth. Daniel closed his eyes. The silence that followed was louder than any cry. After several long moments, Daniel slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, but his voice remained calm. Thank you. Sharon looked confused. For what? For coming. If you hadn't, I would have waited for her all day. Sharon began crying even harder. Daniel gave a faint smile. My father once told me, the truth may break your heart, but a lie destroys your soul. I'm grateful you chose the truth. Sharon looked into his broken eyes. She wasn't seeing a crippled man, she was seeing a wounded soul. After a long silence, she quietly replied, if this marriage will protect your dignity today, I'll stand beside you. Please find a place in your heart to forgive. Moments later, they exchanged vows, not because they were deeply in love, but because compassion had brought two broken hearts together. Their first evening together was unusually quiet, no celebration, no laughter, no wedding photographs, only silence. Sharon placed a cup of tea beside Daniel. You should eat something. Daniel smiled faintly. I'm not hungry. Sharon didn't argue. She simply sat beside him. Sometimes, the greatest comfort isn't knowing what to say. It's choosing not to let someone suffer alone. Days turned into weeks. Sharon never demanded expensive gifts. She never asked about Daniel's savings. She never complained about their simple home. Instead, she woke up early each morning, prepared breakfast, watered the flowers, read stories to Daniel when he couldn't sleep. She celebrated his small victories and quietly carried his burdens as though they were her own. For the first time, Daniel experienced a love that expected nothing in return, a love that brought peace instead of pressure. One afternoon, Sharon insisted they take a walk. Daniel resisted at first. I don't feel like going, she smiled. Then let me borrow your sadness for one afternoon. He laughed, his first genuine laugh since the day his heart was broken. As they watched children playing nearby, Daniel realized something. Sharon never tried to replace his painful memories. She simply created new ones. Slowly, the darkness inside him began to fade. That evening, Daniel quietly watched Sharon setting the table. She hummed softly while serving dinner. She didn't know he was watching. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was simply being herself. Daniel finally understood something. Ruth had made his heart race, but Sharon made his heart feel safe. This wasn't the kind of love built on excitement. It was the kind that healed wounds. The kind his soul had been searching for all along, without ever knowing it. Sharon never tried to impress Daniel. She never made grand speeches. Instead, she loved him in quiet ways. She repaired his torn clothes. She remembered how he liked his tea. She reminded him to take his medicine. She left encouraging little notes where she knew he would find them. Today is another chance to smile. You're stronger than yesterday. Daniel began noticing something. Everything Sharon did came from her heart, never from obligation. Late one evening, Daniel found Sharon asleep on the sofa. He gently covered her with a blanket. Then he simply stood there, looking at the woman who had asked for nothing, expected nothing, yet had given him everything. He whispered, I spent my whole life searching for someone who would love me, without ever realizing she was quietly healing my heart. A tear rolled down his cheek. not from pain, but from gratitude. At that moment, Daniel knew. He wasn't just thankful for Sharon, he was deeply, completely in love with her. The next morning, he would take his wife to the one place he had kept secret from everyone, his true home. The next morning, the sun had barely risen. Sharon prepared breakfast while Daniel quietly watched the sunrise. For the first time in many months, peace filled the little apartment. Then, the silence was broken. The sound of sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Black luxury SUVs slowly entered the narrow street. Neighbors rushed outside. Children pointed excitedly. Everyone wondered, who could possibly be important enough for such a grand arrival? Sharon looked through the window. Her eyes widened. Daniel? I think someone very important is here. Daniel smiled gently. They are. They've come for us. Daniel looked at the wheelchair that had been beside him for so long. He rested his hands on the armrests. Then, slowly, he stood up. Without pain, without hesitation, without help. Sharon froze. The tray slipped from her hands and crashed onto the floor. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Daniel took a few calm steps toward her. She whispered, "Daniel, you can walk?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Yes, I always could." Tears filled Sharon's eyes. "I don't understand." Daniel gently held her hands. "My parents wanted to know if someone could love me without seeing wealth, without seeing power. So I left the palace. I lived as an ordinary man. I used the wheelchair so people would judge my heart instead of my title." Sharon stared at him. "You trusted me with nothing, and I loved you anyway." Daniel smiled. "Exactly. You never loved what I owned. You loved who I was." Outside, the convoy stretched as far as the eye could see. Royal guards stepped from the vehicles. The neighborhood fell silent. People whispered among themselves. "Who lives here? Is a president visiting?" No one imagined the convoy had come for the quiet young man everyone believed was poor. Tears filled Sharon's eyes. "I don't understand." Daniel gently held her hands. "I wanted to know if someone could love me without seeing wealth, without seeing power. So I left the palace. I lived as an ordinary man. I used the wheelchair so people would judge my heart instead of my title." Sharon stared at him. "You trusted me with nothing, and I loved you anyway." Daniel smiled. "Exactly. You never loved what I owned. You loved who I was." She frowned and was angry. "Daniel, you deceived all of us. Played with our intelligence. Do you think this is funny?" "Please, I'm sorry," said Daniel. "I really suffered having girls take advantage of me and never loved me for who I am. I wanted true love. I'm sorry." The convoy stretched as far as the eye could see. Royal guards stepped from the vehicles. The neighborhood fell silent. People whispered among themselves, "Who lives here? Is a president visiting?" No one imagined the convoy had come for the quiet young man everyone believed was poor. As Daniel stepped outside, the commander of the royal guards removed his cap. Every guard bowed together. "Welcome home, your royal highness." The street became completely silent. Neighbors gasped. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Sharon slowly turned toward Daniel. She looked at the man she had comforted, cooked for, encouraged, prayed with, the man everyone had mocked. He wasn't simply wealthy. He was a prince. Daniel gently squeezed her hand, then smiled. "My queen. Let's go home." As the convoy drove away, Sharon looked out the window. Her old neighborhood slowly disappeared behind them. She wasn't leaving because she had chased wealth. She was leaving because she had chosen love. Daniel looked at her with grateful eyes. "You healed a heart you didn't break. You believed in me when there was nothing to gain." Sharon smiled through tears. "I never needed a prince. I only wanted a good man." Daniel kissed her hand gently, "And that's exactly why. You deserve a kingdom." Ahead of them, the palace gates slowly opened. A new chapter of their lives was about to begin. The towering golden gates slowly opened. One after another, the convoy entered the royal estate. Sharon couldn't believe her eyes. Crystal fountains sparkled beneath the morning sun. Magnificent gardens stretched farther than she could see. Every servant, every guard, every member of the royal staff stood respectfully as Daniel's car passed. She turned toward him. Her voice barely escaped. "Daniel, why didn't you tell me?" Daniel smiled softly. "Because I wanted someone who would choose my heart before discovering my crown." The car came to a gentle stop. Before Daniel could say a word, Queen Clara hurried toward him. She wrapped her son in a warm embrace. "My son, you've finally come home." King Leonard placed a proud hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We've missed you." Then, both of them turned toward Sharon. Sharon immediately lowered her head. I don't know how to greet royalty." Queen Clara smiled with kindness. "She's such a beauty to behold. You don't need to fear us." She walked over and embraced Sharon like a daughter. "You stood beside our son when you believed he had nothing. You are already family." Tears filled Sharon's eyes. No one had ever welcomed her with such love. Later that afternoon, they gathered in the royal sitting room. King Leonard spoke gently. "Sharon, thank you for loving our son unconditionally. You're indeed a rare gem. You deserve everything good." Daniel nodded. Queen Clara smiled warmly. "And after all this time, God brought you to the woman he had prepared for you." Daniel looked into Sharon's eyes. "I searched for love, but I found something even greater. I found peace." At that very moment, Ruth hurried to Steve's apartment. She smiled. "We finally have the money." But Steve wasn't smiling. He quietly zipped his suitcase. "I'm leaving." Ruth froze. "What?" Steve looked at her without emotion. "I was never looking for love. I was looking for an opportunity. And now I'm done." Ruth grabbed his arm. "You can't leave me." Steve gently removed her hand. "The same way you walked away from Daniel, I'm walking away from you." The door closed behind him. For the first time, Ruth understood what abandonment truly felt like. A few days later, Ruth stopped in front of a giant television screen. Breaking news filled the air. Prince Daniel returns home with his wife after completing a private royal mission. Then, the cameras showed Sharon, elegant, graceful, standing proudly beside Daniel. Ruth's knees became weak. The man she had called a poor cripple was a prince, but the title wasn't what hurt the most. What shattered her heart was remembering every moment Daniel had loved her sincerely. She whispered through tears, "He loved me when I had nothing, and I couldn't love him because I thought he had nothing." As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Daniel and Sharon stood together on the palace balcony. Daniel looked into her eyes. "You gave me something no crown ever could. You showed me what true love looks like." Sharon smiled softly. "And you taught me that the greatest riches are found in a sincere heart." Daniel slipped a beautiful royal ring onto her finger. "This time, I want to ask you again, not because we have to, but because I love you. Sharon, will you spend forever with me?" With tears of joy in her eyes, Sharon whispered, "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." As they embraced beneath the golden sunset, the palace bells rang across the kingdom. This time, not to announce a test, but to celebrate a love that had been built on honesty, sacrifice, and unwavering faith. Months later, the entire kingdom gathered for a wedding unlike any other. This time, there were no lies, no disguises, no hidden identities. Prince Daniel stood proudly at the altar, not searching for love, but waiting for the woman who had already proven hers. As the doors opened, Sharon appeared. She wasn't wearing wealth. She wasn't wearing status. She was wearing dignity. The dignity of a woman whose love had remained pure, even when she believed she had married an ordinary man. Daniel smiled through tears. "This is the day my heart truly came home." When it was time to exchange vows, Daniel looked only at Sharon. "My crown may belong to this kingdom, but my heart belongs to you. You loved me when there was nothing to gain. You stayed when others walked away. I promise to honor that love every day of my life." Sharon smiled through happy tears. "I never fell in love with a prince. I fell in love with a kind man. And if tomorrow all the riches disappeared, I would still choose you." The cathedral echoed with applause, not because they were royalty, but because everyone had witnessed a love built on truth. Far from the front rows, Ruth stood quietly among the crowd. No jewels, no expensive clothes, no Steve, only silence. As she watched Daniel smile, she remembered every sacrifice he had once made for her. She remembered the notebook, the flowers, the promises, the trust she had thrown away. She whispered, "I didn't lose a prince. I lost a man who loved me honestly, and that loss would stay with her forever." As the celebration continued, Ruth quietly turned to leave, but fate had one final meeting planned. She came face to face with Daniel and Sharon. Ruth couldn't lift her eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't deserve forgiveness." Daniel remained silent for a moment, then spoke gently. "You hurt me deeply. I won't pretend it didn't happen, but I won't carry bitterness for the rest of my life." Sharon stepped forward. "We hope you choose a different path from today." Ruth nodded through tears. For the first time, she understood that forgiveness is a gift, not an excuse. Months passed. Ruth's life was no longer filled with shortcuts. She found honest work. She treated people with kindness, not because she expected a reward, but because she had learned the painful cost of selfish choices. The regret never completely disappeared, but she refused to let it define the rest of her life. Every day became another chance to become a better person than she had been yesterday. Some people spend their lives searching for wealth, only to discover that the greatest treasure was standing beside them all along. Daniel found a woman who loved his heart before she ever knew his title. Sharon discovered that true love is never measured by riches, but by character. And Ruth learned that when you trade sincerity for selfish ambition, you may gain something for a moment, but lose something priceless forever. Because true love doesn't ask, "How much do you have?" It asks, "Who are you when everything else is gone?" And in the end, the heart that loves with honesty will always be richer than the hand that holds the most gold. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell for more emotional stories that remind us what true love really means. Share this story with someone who believes that character is worth more than riches. Until next time, this is where every story leaves a lesson for the heart.